Okay, you can go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Beth Ann, and thanks for everyone being here today. I am Jeff Rader. I am a member of the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and I certainly commend each of you for being in pursuit of your AICP credential. It will serve you well in your career, and I think will really create a distinction for you that is one that is significant and one that's lasting. So as you know, we cover different segments in the exam review process. This one on leadership and administration and management, I think, is important and relevant to your role as a professional planner. And certainly there's some review in terms of sort of the structural elements of the role, but also kind of the way that things work when it comes to working particularly in the public sector and also as an advisor to the public sector and making public policy recommendations and getting them to actually be implemented. The first thing that you need to know is in the graph there. If there is a session that you may want to consider skipping, this might be it, because test weight is only 5% of the test, but nevertheless, I think it is important, and you know, hope that you will stay tuned in for the information that we're trying to share. I wanted to talk a little bit about the words leadership, administration, and management. Obviously, these are words that are very much current and are used a lot in our profession. They have some subtle distinctions. I suggest here that leadership is the ability to influence decision making, to manage external relationships, such as the ones that you see here. To be able to manage the organization that you're working with, because working with people is often one of the most challenging responsibilities that we have in our careers, and is really seminal to our ability to be able to be effective in our role. And then as we look at this suite of competencies, technology increasingly is an important aspect of leadership, administration, and management, because it represents one of the major and evolving tools that we use in this particular field. A little bit more about leadership. You know, these are kind of two different takes on leadership from two thought leaders. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. And I think that that certainly is the case, that those of us who are blessed with good leadership, either from ourselves or from those that we work with, are really at a great advantage, because we're focused on the issues and the ideas that matter. Then General Eisenhower and later President Eisenhower, I thought had a good angle on this, insofar as the recognition that leadership really is something that has to do with influence. If you can get someone else to do what you want because they want to do it, then you will assume the role of a leader within that dynamic. In public administration, leadership is the exercise of authority. Authority is important in public administration, doing things because you are empowered to do that, and that you're tasked with that through some assignment of authority. But nevertheless, you must work to direct and coordinate the work of others. And within that bureaucratic context, it's subtly different from the other ideas. In the public sector, really, we are looking for imperatives as it relates to leadership that perhaps are not as applicable in areas of private endeavor. For instance, controls in the exercise of leadership that limit risk taking. You can't just allow folks, to go where they want, because there are very specific parameters and expectations for what a leader in the public sector can accomplish, and particularly when they're at the staff level. Accountability to the public is a corollary and a primary goal of those that are leaders in the public sector. There is the concept of ministerial parameters. In our form of government, typically elected officials make policy decisions, and then the staff, our professionals, are required to ministerially carry out those policy parameters, and recognizing that you are acting as the implementer of a policy that is developed based upon a public assignment of authority is important. Also, back to this limited risk-taking, checks and balances on the authority of those who seek to use these ministerial powers. And finally, you can never go wrong if you keep as a foundational principle that you are working to be fair to all those involved in the process. How do you achieve those goals? I would suggest that mission statements are very useful in being able to start that process of understanding exactly where your leadership should be taking you. This is an example of a mission statement, and I'll let you read it yourself, but you can see the mission and then the function of the department. But these types of tools, mission statements, statements of values, those types of things are very useful as folks try to test the situation that they're confronting against the overarching principles that they're tasked with. Often these mission statements or other constructs are adopted by policymakers, and they give you a good roadmap of what is expected of you, both by them as well as by the public that they represent. There are a variety of different constructs or ways that leadership is wielded. This seeks to identify kind of where some of the influence may be coming in different models of leadership. In sort of the construct on the left, it's a fairly linear sort of a process. The public empowers the governing authority to make policies that and assign authority to an administration, and then the administration manages the agency that you may be working for, the planning department. So it starts from the public wield and moves in a linear fashion through that hierarchy. You can also see the pattern of influence being a little bit more multi-directional, and I think perhaps that the diagram on the right represents perhaps more of what we will see in our practice, because obviously the public does not exclusively give their input to the governing authority and expect that to be passed on. They want to be directly in contact. And so this diagram seeks to show how the influences are coming from other directions, and that the planning department role is really to try to mediate these different influences. Sometimes they are on the same wavelength, sometimes they're competing with each other, but nevertheless, you're getting all of this input, and leadership is a role of successfully being able to manage all of those influences. When it comes to strategies, you got to start somewhere, and often we get involved with kind of rote processes that it's more of a bureaucracy. But to be effective in leadership, I suggest that here are some strategic imperatives. First of all, what I term as constructing the lens and defining the focus. So leadership involves trying to create a means by which you're explaining both what you're trying to analyze and scrutinize, and then at what level you choose to do that. So if you think of a lens as a means of providing clarity or a special spotlight on a particular issue, then how you set up that lens, so to speak, what it is sensitive to, and at what scale it best works is an important element of the construct. Likewise, lenses have the ability to be varied in order to define the focus. Sometimes your lens can focus at the micro level, and sometimes it's important to back off and look at macro to understand whether or not you're achieving the goals of the strategy that you're trying to implement. I think that effective leaders are not wedded to a sole means of being able to look at a particular issue. And so being open source means that you are receptive to other people's constructs in terms of how they might see a particular issue. This is particularly important when we work with diverse cultural groups, both as our stakeholders in the process and also increasingly with our diverse workforce. It may well be that their means of being able to construct the lens has some advantages that we may want to integrate into our own. But ultimately, I think that it is important that always we return to some semblance or some representation, which is difficult to understand what objectivity is at a certain point, but it should be a goal. And to be objective ultimately helps you to identify potential pitfalls or other compromises to blind spots, perhaps, to your view in the least possible amount of time. So both being open to different perspectives, but maintaining that objectivity, I think, is an important concept to consider. Another priority is to show your work. Once you get out of about third grade, the response, because I said so, is probably not going to be satisfying to many of the folks that you have to deal with, or besides, after you get out, after you're done dealing with third graders. So by showing your work, by being able to explain why you have reached the decisions or the perspectives that you have arrived at, being able to document why you do that, I think is helpful in gaining support for that perspective, or at least validation of your perspective. Let other actors play their roles. What I'm trying to communicate there is that we're planners and we're integrators of a lot of different streams of information, a lot of different perspectives. That's sort of our strong suit as planners. But there are also specialists that are important to consider their role within that leadership and strategic decision-making process. and they ought to play their appropriate roles. And we also ought not try to solve completely for those that are at another level of the integrated strategic decision-making process, such as perhaps higher level administrators or the elected officials or policymakers that may ultimately be evaluating these things. What that sort of means is that, you know, if a well-researched and logically arrived at conclusion, you know, might strike you as something that would be perceived to be controversial at another level of administration or policymaking, it doesn't necessarily mean that you ought to take that off the table, because that ultimately, dealing with those hard choices, dealing with those objective observations that you've been able to arrive at, you know, notwithstanding the fact that they're difficult situations, nevertheless, it may be the role of the another person in that process, or another entity or agency to ultimately make that decision as to whether or not that a particular decision ought to be made. And the final point that I would make is be the scorekeeper. Often these are multifaceted decisions. They're ideas that can have some competition to each other, but the more that we can, you know, document this process and help to recall what has been decided, what has been prioritized, and how that affects the subsequent decisions, it's a very useful role to be able to say, well, we said this on this date, and we decided to go in this direction. And so now, given that, where do we want to go in that regard? So be the scorekeeper is the one that is sort of the one that keeps the minutes and tries to keep everybody moving along this process and is, again, the objective way that they can. External relationships. You know, often, particularly when we're working within the regulatory environment, we respond to those with whom we interact. Naturally, we perceive of them as the customer and the folks who are seeking and therefore should receive service. But obviously, if we're administering public processes, the customer may not be in the room. The customer may be the public that you are there to serve, and not perhaps the person that pulls the permit. They both are forms of customers, but we can't prioritize necessarily one to the expense of another, so that we can make sure that in solving the immediate needs or pressing objectives of one stakeholder, we are not discounting those of another. So always remember, when you're making those customer service decisions, who is the customer, and are you serving them even if they're not in the room? I would assert, and I think that it will serve you well if you consider good customer service to be an obligation, and that it is a minimum expectation, and whether you can you know, help somebody or not, to give them what they expect in terms of responsiveness, timeliness, courtesy, and transparency is an expectation that is certainly important to prioritize. The next point, deliver or deny with integrity and authority. Sometimes you'll be given good news, sometimes you won't be given good news. The receiver of that news should not have any reason to believe that the answer would be different for someone else than the answer that they're getting. and they should be well assured and confident of your integrity in making that decision. Some of the previous imperatives, I think, help you to be able to document and demonstrate your integrity when making those decisions. But then once that decision is made, you have to render that decision with authority. And whereas it may not be, what the individual wants to hear, you need for them to be persuaded that the decision was reached at a, in a rational way, and that the decision is not dependent upon some externality such as, talking to somebody that they know, or getting an answer from somebody else that might deliver something differently. If you can accomplish those two goals of integrity and authority, it really will help to keep the process moving, and hopefully those that don't hear what they want will be able to understand, because of your transparency, why it is that their expectations were unfulfilled, and perhaps even change their approach in order to obtain the approvals that they may want. And then finally, always identify and ensure the availability of appropriate avenues of appeal, whether it is within the administrative structure or whether the code or policies that you may be administering, they could be flawed in a particular way. You can appeal on an administrative level, and those mechanisms are usually there, and you shouldn't be threatened by the notion of an appeal over one's head. But in some cases, the policies or the codes may not work the way that they ought to, and appealing to the governing authority for a change in those parameters may be entirely appropriate, where then the answer would be different because the rule is different. We in the planning profession have to rely upon others, both inside and outside of our organizations. And again, I believe that one of the planners' strongest skill sets is integration of conflicting or complementary information. And so therefore, don't consider the decisions that you make in isolation. It's drummed into us in school, it's drummed into us in our training, but do remember that input from other quarters is always important and is validly influential. In a perfect world, the planner might be responsible for direct advisement to the decision maker, and the other functional or technical inputs would be consolidated and rationalized through the lens of the planner. But often, other folks have other avenues of authority and contacts, and often decision makers see, other priorities as being more pertinent or relevant to a decision than perhaps we might see it. So we need to recognize that in a perfect world, we could help to balance all of these influences and inputs, and then provide a rationalized recommendation. But often some of the inputs get away from us, and we've got to be able to continue to deal with that. If you do get it right and you get everybody collaborating together and recognizing the validity of other perspectives, then you have that role of being the synthesizer of the variety of inputs, and you can demonstrate the efficacy of planning and making good decisions by bringing all of those viewpoints to bear on an issue. And then there is the the concept of playing hardball. Sometimes people want to play hardball with you. They say, well, look, I'm making this decision and I don't want you to open your mouth otherwise. And in those cases, I think that the quality of the process that you have developed to make your decision and recommendation help to justify it regardless of what may come. And then secondarily, sometimes it's important for planners to likewise play hardball and say, well, I can't support that particular decision because of these factors and because of this analysis, and I'm going to have to withdraw my support, or I can't endorse the decision that you may be making. You hate to get to that point because you would hope that you could persuade people otherwise, but playing hardball is, part of the real world. And I think that we need to ignore it at our own risk if we do. Boards and commissions. So, one of the key characteristics that we operate in, or the world that we operate in, is that we have boards or other groups, whether they're elected or appointed, that review our recommendations and ultimately make a decision that is intended to be informed by their unique perspective. We don't want to look at boards and commissions as something of just a box to check off, or a necessary evil in order to get our recommendations implemented. But instead, I think that we need to look at these bodies, who are often not professional in the field, as real opportunities to give them better tools for making the decisions that they have. So I certainly endorse planning organizations working very hard in increasing the capacity of their boards to make good decisions, whether they're the governing authority or the planning commission, zoning board of appeals, or even a citizens council. Give those folks the tools that they need, give them the education that they need, so that they can make good decisions. The sort of the opposite of that is the mushroom treatment. Keep them in the dark and feed them manure, and hopefully get what you want based upon what you give them. To me, that is a real pitfall, because when we do that, then those boards and commissions are not accomplishing what they were set up to do, and the decisions will suffer as a result. And finally, I think it's important to consult your boards and commissions on what they need to do a better job, and what they think is, works well, or what doesn't work. And so for us to ask them how we can better serve them, and always try to build that feedback loop and make them understand that we're actively listening to the concerns or the suggestions that they may have. On the issue of transparency and open records and confidentiality. So this again proceeds from, or at least the first point proceeds from, the assumption that you're in the public sector. The public has a right to know everything. We work for the public. The public is ultimately our stakeholder and our and the powers of the government are derived directly from those who are governed. So the public has a right to know, with the exception of private information or some other factors. And I don't think that it is wise for us in dealing with the public to presume that they're being a little bit nosy, or that you know, you shouldn't have to justify or to show the things that have informed your decision, that somehow they should not have access to that. Obviously, there are some privacy and other issues that you have to abide by, but the default, I think, is that the public has a right to know, and we ought to keep that in mind. If we have transparent processes, then we can make transparent decisions that people can replicate. And people, if they don't agree with the process or the decision, then they have recourse to be able to potentially propose changes to that process. As I mentioned before, some things really are private, and we need to identify those and be able to build the appropriate mechanisms to maintain that private information, whether it is you know, people's contact information, or whether it is proprietary processes or information that a applicant may be sharing with you. If they are competitively valuable, we ought to make sure that such information can reasonably be protected. And then finally, after having achieved these goals, your ethics, as you know, defined and amplified by our code of ethics, should make for easy decision making when it comes to dealing with these particular issues, because the appropriate course of action will be made more obvious through adherence to our ethics mechanisms and our professional codes. So internal organizational management. Now let's talk about how we work with the people who on the interior who we work with. Often, and particularly when you get to be in a senior position in an organization, you know, you want to have some control over how people or other decision makers, whether they're people or entities or whatever, you know, view the decisions that you that are proceeding from your organization. And there are a couple of ways to look at this. You could stack the deck. You can try to get sort of your ducks in a row with people and get them to see, you know, what you haven't yet come up with as being, you know, what they're going to follow on with, because they believe that there is an advantage to unity that is pre-negotiated and advances, you know, more as a result of the relationship than from the particular issues that are revealed or dealt with. The other look, sort of way of looking at that is playing the cards that you're dealt, to basically continue to position yourself as a neutral player that is the custodian and the champion of the process, and that you know, if for whatever reason you are what decisions that you're led to through your planning process are not well embraced, then, you know, to be able to maintain the integrity of your process gives you the ability to come back another day and say, well, this process is equally valid. It is your role to be able to decide how to prioritize it and make the final decision. But, you know, every time you're going to get a straight shot from me, and we're not going to try to, as I say, stack the deck in advance. Another important, you know, corollary to this is you know, by sort of pre-priming all of your relationships and the flow of the decision-making process, you know, can you can get good at that, and ultimately you can control how those decisions will flow, whose priorities will emerge from intermediate parts of the process, and pretty much be able to uh, vertically integrate, you know, decision making to the point at which all decisions flow through you or perhaps your allies. Another way, and I want you to think about this too, is whether or not perhaps you should organize your um, uh, network as a nerve center, so that, and by that I mean that you get a variety of different inputs and that people feel as though that the process that you are championing or are the custodian of is a means of being able to efficiently collect the appropriate information to inform a good decision. Um, Sometimes the empire is appealing because you know, it controls uncertainty, but the downside of that is that when you're wrong, the empire, you know, can fall precipitously. And at that point, often somebody's being looked for as who was responsible for the bad decision, and that could be you. There are other, you know, imperatives when it comes to managing your internal organization. Budget and staffing takes up a great deal of the manager's time, and is important when it comes to how effectively your organization performs. I suggest that you prioritize the capacity over the of the staff and of your colleagues over a head count. Sometimes managers believe that they will be more richly rewarded based upon the number of people that they manage versus the actual output of the organization. And it is my experience that whereas there might be a linear relationship between headcount and a perception of seniority, nevertheless, the capacity of the team is more important than the headcount when it comes to actually being able to accomplish the work of the organization. And to accomplish capacity, it's important to systematically build human capital. And to do that in a way that it works as a matter of course, that ideally your organization should devote resources to continuing education, whether it is CE credits for a AICP planner, or a tuition reimbursement program, or a personal human capital development plan for each of your employees, because by doing it in a systematic way, you're giving everybody that chance to advance and to carry on. And when you lose your high performers, you can expect other members of your team to be able to rise to those positions that are now vacated. So I think that thinking very deliberately about how you systematically build the human capital of your organization will be a key to success. One observation that I have on staffing is on outsourced capacity, and that is that you know, my observation is that if it is a function or a process that you have to do on an ongoing basis, on a continualized and you know, everyday sort of competencies and processes, that those are important capabilities to be able to develop internally with your own dedicated staff. On the other hand, if you are looking for, um, you know, innovative and cutting edge solutions to emerging problems, or you're trying to accomplish something that is infrequently encountered, then often it makes sense to outsource that capacity to a planning firm whose primary focus is on trying to survey a broader universe of practice, to identify appropriate techniques, strategies, or competencies that would respond to those extraordinary circumstances, and then to be able to work for you in a more episodic way to be able to bring that expertise to bear. It is difficult for a staff member to be both expert on capabilities that they have to refine and practice on an everyday basis, and also have their head sort of in the clouds or at the 50,000 foot level, trying to understand what the next big thing that's coming is. So, you know, recognize that in some cases you should insource, in other cases you should outsource. Another feature often that we encounter in planning is, and in the administration of the organizations that we work with, are the budgeting process. In many cases, you know, we use the prior year's practice as our foundation, and we look at, you know, are we going to have to add some more money because of seniority, or are we going to have to pay more for the computer licenses that we have, or other different things. So we're going to continue to do the same things. We're just going to make sure that we are varying things at the necessary level to maintain our capacity to do so. And, you know, that's a important way to deal with a lot of the foundational issues that are out there, but it doesn't really confront the question of whether or not we should be doing the things that we're doing, and if we should be doing them in the way that we're doing them. And there, zero-based budgeting is considered to be a tool to say, well, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are the resources that we put into it? And is this the best way of being able to do it? And what if we didn't do that and decided to allocate our resources in a different way? What would be the implications there? Often those are directives that you get from more senior levels of government or of an organization as to which approach that you use, but do be aware of, you know, the different merits of each approach. It's also important to recognize that, you know, you will be subject to external inputs if there's a fall off in either activity or perhaps resources available. You know, sometimes you see people coming in and cutting, quote, across the board, or freezing unfilled positions, or doing other things that are not really informed by the intricacies of the organization and the strategies and processes that you have developed and operated in order to be responsive and to perform. So it's always important to think about your architecture so that if cuts need to be made, you know where, you know, if you cut this particular position just because it's unfilled, you know, your entire organization may be badly hurt by it. And, you know, a lot of times we don't necessarily know where the real key players are until they're gone. So I encourage a really strong understanding of the architecture of your organization, so that when you have to make decisions, you make them in a way that maintains your capacity and does the best to be able to respond to those external influences. You know, again, sort of looking at different models. You know, you've got obviously on the right your rational planning model, that sort of circular idea where you know, we define our problems or set our goals, we identify alternatives, we evaluate the alternatives, we implement, and then we monitor and assess you know, our success. And that classic planning process has a lot of merit to it, and is, you know, something that we all ought to consider. The strategic planning model is an alternative and not necessarily the best for everything, but you can see that it includes some different types of considerations, and potentially would lead you to different decisions or outcomes by using a different model. I'm not necessarily suggesting one is better than the other for all circumstances, but do survey the models that are available to you and try to ensure that the model that you're using is appropriate to the decisions that you're making. And as I said, think about the function of the model and pick the form that best fits it. Here's some other, you know, notions of in terms of organizational operating models. You see one that's again a hierarchy where you have different divisions under a directorate, perhaps working relatively independently within their silos. Then the other model is more one that is interactive, as is tried to indicate on the right-hand side, where there is the goal of trying to get the different functional areas to be more interactive with each other, and thereby allow some of the key relationships between these areas of expertise to bubble up and to develop more integrated or consensus-driven models for recommendations to the directorate or the administration. And then to technology, and I would certainly not, you know, I claim that I myself am anyway a model of technology, or a master of the technology. I mean, just look at me, I'm an old guy, so so we naturally need help from others in order to accomplish our goals when it does come to technology. But you should be aware of what the tools are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Obviously, there are some key data sets or tools, platforms that are in general use. I list some of them here, but you know, be at least a master of what these data sets, and this is by no means a complete list, can be available to you, and you know, really question as to whether or not to develop your own sort of custom data set when these sets may well serve more completely, and certainly have the advantage of being maintained and improved by others. When you do choose technology, make sure that you can show its impact. Technology is expensive. It changes rapidly. When you make a case to a resource decision maker that you need a piece of technology or some sort of a technological capacity, bear in mind that you know, they want to see some delivery from that technology when it comes to some tangible effect. And so they're concerned that it's expensive and then it changes rapidly, so you want to make the right decision. It is easiest to get those decisions made if you can convince and demonstrate the value of those investments in technology to your decision makers. And once that decision has been made to invest in some technological solution, then it is incumbent upon you and your organization to fully master and integrate the technology investment into your operation. I can't tell you how many times I have seen things like an Oracle system or some other major investment be made in a architecture or a framework, and a commensurate investment is not made in either the operating modules within at a department level or at an individual level, or that we didn't invest in the training on the technology to allow our staff to fully understand what its capabilities is. And I think that it's also important to recognize that by introducing new technology, there is a very high chance that you're going to have to adapt and optimize your processes in order to get the most out of that technology. So we can't use technology and a workaround to put the information into the technological framework to get the answer or the check or the whatever other output that you want it to get, and just feed it the minimum necessary. You have to make sure that the technology that you're using is fully exploited in your operating processes and in your business process. And then if you want technological investment to continue, then it's important to think about demonstrating the power and efficacy of the tool to decision makers and say, because you gave us this, we were able to do that, and this benefits our mission in these quantifiable ways. So closing that loop and being able to demonstrate the power of the tool is particularly important in order to continue to make technology part of your strategy of solutions. And I know that that was kind of an abrupt end, but I am available and I can take this down. And if there are any questions, I could certainly answer them.
Thank you, Jeff. If anybody has any questions, if you want to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask the question, that would be great. While we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I just want to thank you, Jeff, for your participation, and we really appreciate it, helping get everyone prepared for their exam. Don't see any questions coming in right now, but if any do come in, I'll be starting to share them with Jeff and provide his response with everyone. With that being said, I just want to say thank you and hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we will stop recording. Thank you all.